You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode
53 of A Life in Ruins podcast, where we investigate the careers of those living our life in ruins.
I'm your host, Carlton Gover, and I am joined by my co-hosts, David Ian Howe and Connor John. And today, in Just the Boys episode, we are going to be tackling the pre-Clovis and Clovis debate, or explanations for the initial occupation of the Americas by Homo sapiens sapiens. So we have a list of
emphasis on Homo sapiens sapiens, by the way.
Yes. Emphasis. Nothing else. No sorority, no settlers of sorority here.
Wait,
for this one.
Are you guys finally agreeing on it's Homo sapiens sapiens? Because you guys there was beef.
It's always been Homo sapiens sapiens, but the debate was, is it Homo sapiens neanderthalensis or Homo neanderthalensis? And we all know, if you are a Homo sapiens sapien with a fully functioning evolved brain, you know it is Homo sapiens neanderthalensis.
Only someone with Neanderthal DNA would call it Homo neanderthalensis.
2.2% you...
Point proven.
So
we're not talking about Paleoindian in this episode. Yeah, we're moving aside from that. So really, we're going to talk about pre-Clovis and Clovis here in the North American, and I guess South American too, archaeological record. The three of us all got our masters at University of Wyoming, a rather prolific Paleoindian department, hunter-gatherer department, I would say. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Very much so. Very, very heavy in that. You know, we have some of the big players in the game, you know, Todd Surville, Bob Kelly, who are, you know, interested in this time period. And there's also a ton of archaeology sites, Paleoindian sites in Wyoming that are actually studied at the University of Wyoming. So we were exposed to this stuff very early on in our graduate career. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's shaped your guys' view on this stuff, but it certainly brought to light a bunch of issues.
Yeah, and don't forget the late, great George Frizen, as well as, Dr. Kornfeld and Dr. Larson, who do the Hell Gap, that's like a Cody complex, right? Do they have a Clovis component? I know I worked there, but I know it goes deep. I just don't know how deep.
I don't think it...
There's a Clovis point from Hell Gap, right?
It's Paleoindian. I don't know if
Definitely.
It's Clovis, but... Oh. Hang on, guys. It's, hello? Oh, what's up, National Geographic? Oh, it's Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. You see, that's what I thought. Thank you, National Geographic, for calling me and telling me this in the middle of the podcast. I love you too. Bye.
I was about to get so mad. Like a sack of shit. Okay. Okay. Anyways, thank you for that, David.
Thank National Geographic.
Yeah, I'm sure that was them. So this whole God darn you, David. This whole topic about man's antiquity in the United States stems from the Enlightenment period, right? And particularly in the 1800s, there were some projectile points found in it was like a French river, right? With some Pleistocene animals.
A French river?
Yeah. So the whole conversation about the antiquity of man globally.
Oh, right.
Yeah. There's I forget what river it was in France, but this whole debate got kicked off by them finding a bunch of projectile points in extinct megafauna from Europe. And for a long time, the question of how long man has been in the Americas was pondered because they hadn't found anything like that. But that all changed, didn't it, boys?
Yeah, it did.
One could say.
So the important site in this is the Folsom site in Folsom, New Mexico, which I hear is not the greatest town, but it's worth visiting at some point if you're down there. And it was also discovered, I'm not completely clear. It was also completely clear exactly how it went, but George McJunkins, who was he was a freed slave, right? Was eventually one of the first founders of what we know as the first Folsom point embedded in a Pleistocene megafauna. So it's kind of a cool story, and it really, he did some important stuff for the field. But I think that's all I got on it. Any other details that I'm missing?
Was there someone before him that found projectile points with a mammoth that confirmed the antiquity first, and then he was the first one to say that they lived with? No, because that's right. George McJohn was the one that confirmed that people were here during the Ice Age. Yeah, maybe I am thinking of the French thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so McJunkin was a freedman, cowboy, working property outside of Folsom, New Mexico, and out of an eroding arroyo, he noticed that there were some bones that looked a little way too big to be cow bones. So he checked them out. Turned out to be an extinct species of Pleistocene bison. And he contacted archaeologists from Denver, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, I believe, because that Folsom Point is at the History Colorado, the State Historic Museum. And they came down, and there's that really famous photograph of a Folsom Point in situ in between these two bison ribs. And that was like, okay, there's the evidence that man's been here. And then later on, outside of Clovis, New Mexico, that's where they found the Clovis Point, and which was older than Folsom. And
just to give it a time period. So this is in 1908 when he first discovers this. So early 20th century. I can't do math. Yeah, 1908.
Like before World War I.
Yeah, so this is like super early on in archaeology, and we as a discipline in America, I don't even think we were a discipline in reality.
Very much antiquarian still.
Yeah.
So not a professional field quite yet, right?
Yeah, we had like history, and I believe we had like archaeology, but it was like you went to Greece and Rome and did all that crap, and you were at Harvard and you were like, yeah. And like, that's what archaeology was until then. Then like, literally found by a cowboy. And then the rest of the time it was like, let's go pitch a tent in the middle of the woods and just dig some holes in the ground and find some rocks. And then that's kind of what we're doing now. Change the game.
Yeah, 100%. Totally changed the game. And with that, Blackwater Draw, New Mexico is somewhere in there as well.
It is a place.
It is. I don't know.
It's like, it's basically the Texas border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's the actual site it was at. It's outside of Folsom, New Mexico, and the locality is called Blackwater Draw.
That might be it.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. We might, if we get hate mail, so be it. But Clovis is about like 13,000 years ago. That's the time frame for Clovis.
Like 13.5, 13.2, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's constantly being like changed and modified,
challenged.
Some article that was like Clovis was only around for 250 years. Like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. So I got 13,000 to 11,000 BP. And Clovis was found at Blackwater. That's where Clovis was found. Was Blackwater Draw.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Right.
We know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. We have degrees.
And from this, there stems this theory, this idea that the Clovis people were the first people in Americas, and they come into America in this small little time period where there's an ice-free corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, Cordilleran in Alaska, that kind of area. So this is kind of the accepted theory, starting from there on out.
Yeah, and the big question is like, okay, if there's people here in the Ice Age, how'd they get here? And that was kind of like the big debate for a long time, and especially those early sites, Clovis, Folsom, those are all in like New Mexico, right? We're not finding these early sites early on in the beginning of the 20th century on the West Coast, on the East Coast. And as Connor was talking about this ice-free corridor, because around, from the Beringian shoreline, which is the landmass that connected eastern Siberia with Alaska, that was rather substantial. Like it extended, I believe, like from the current coast of Siberia out upwards of like 400 miles. Completely connected. But the problem was for a long time that Pleistocene ice sheet before if you're watching the video, I'm using my hands, before the Laurentide and Cordilleran separated, I mean, you're talking about Game of Thrones ice wall height of glaciers. Like they're upwards of a mile high you're not climbing them. And if you do, there's nothing up there.
I should have thrown you from the top of the wall, boy.
Exactly.
Do you guys know who first thought about the land bridge theory?
Actually, I don't.
Jose de Acosta. He was a Franciscan monk or a friar, I think, in New Spain, or Spanish missionary. And yeah, he was like looking at a map and everyone was like, you know, how'd these people get here? Like, where are all these Mayans coming from? Where are these Aztecs coming from? And he looked at the map and he was like, oh, see, Alaska and Russia, they're pretty close. You know, I mean, it wasn't Alaska at the time, but like maybe they just, you know, walked or, you know, floated across that little gap there. And that's kind of where it came from.
Interesting.
And like,
Yeah, and it's possible to cross it. I think there was a recent paper, we should have that person on, that showed there were Italian glass beads in Inuit communities in Alaska.
Oh yeah.
Prior to European colonization in the South, because they had traveled along the Silk Road and got to Inuit communities in Eastern Russia, and they were trading them with their relatives across the strait.
really?
Yeah, dude, it's nuts.
It's pretty sick.
So it's possible. We got the evidence. That's what we got. So yeah, this ice-free corridor, the ice-free corridor didn't open up. And there's a distinction we got to make. When does it open up and when is it livable? Because even after there's no ice there, there's nothing else. It probably looks like a lot like Hoth, right? There's nothing in there except for some giant grizzly bears hiding around.
And as it's melting, there's just water and it's just like this muddy, disgusting mess. Like, how do you actually traverse in between two glaciers that are actively melting? So it looks on the sides, it's like tauntauns, and in the sun, well, I guess in the winter it's like Hoth and there's tauntauns and wampas and all that stuff. And then, you know, in the summer when things start to melt, it's just disgusting. I don't know if you've ever been.
And it's still cold.
Yeah.
And it's just still just cold and miserable.
Well, the idea though is right that they were following like herd animals and like following bison and horses and mammoth and all that into the corridor. So if you're an efficient big game hunter like you were in Siberia coming across here, if you got a mammoth, you got a nice dry, you know, hut to build, and you know, you make skin tents and things like that, and you can make your way down the corridor and you got plenty of food to eat. But like the question like you guys are asking is like, you know, how livable is that? Because you still got to find water, you still got to find some other stuff to subside on besides just meat, though they could have just been eating meat. I don't know. It's a lot to consider. But I mean, it just makes sense though, right? You're following herd animals. This corridor opens up. They're looking for the food. They're going to go south. You just follow them. I don't know why people are like, it's just a stupid idea. It's like, no, it's pretty logical. I don't know.
Well, and then kind of like future, like research has shown that the opening occurred right before Clovis people really show up in America. So it's not like they're just like, oh, of course it's empty in this point, and then people should have known. There's like actual evidence suggesting that the ice-free corridor started to open, melt right before the Clovis folks really show up in America. So it's hard to argue against that as coincidence in reality.
Yeah. And there's been like pollen analysis, because even if it's open, right, you know, as Dave was talking about, that corridor is several thousand miles long. And in order to follow the big game, they need to eat something, which is a lot of grass. So there's like pollen research that's been done, pollen residue, pollen samples. So even though it was open, it took a while for the grasses to resettle to allow the big game animals to eat. But that still happens prior to Clovis populations showing up in the like interior of the US, right? Because we're still talking about sites on like the Southwest Great Plains, really nothing on the West Coast. And we'll get into this in the later segment. The sites that we do have on the East Coast, we're going to talk about those, such as Meadowcroft, Cactus Hill, and Topper. I mean, this idea of Clovis people being related to the ice-free corridor, I think largely checks out. I mean, you guys would agree?
Yeah, it's just the only reason it doesn't check out is because people are looking for every little cherry-picked argument to say that it doesn't check out. And like, I'll see people on Reddit or like social media be like, "Isn't the Bering Land theory outdated and like or incorrect?" And it's like, it's not that it's incorrect. It's just that there are also other pathways people could come that wasn't just the corridor. They could have come down in boats too. That doesn't make the other one incorrect. which just tells me that you don't want it to be correct, and like drives me up the wall.
Well, I think initially when it's this Clovis first theory is coming out, they're proponents of like it's only Clovis first and there's nothing else. And then there's this like, and this is informal and this is what people call it. There's just like Clovis mafia that goes around and kind of promotes it and doesn't really accept anything besides, you know, this kind of theory. But I don't know if that's still today, or I think there's this more of acceptance that there could be possible multiple migrations into the Americas in reality.
We don't prefer Clovis Mafia, or I should say they don't prefer Clovis Mafia.
David just outed himself.
Organized crime family. So yeah, it's not mafia. All right.
Excellent. And so these other hypotheses real quick, and then David, jump on in. Like these other, so we have ice-free corridor, and the other ones that we're going to talk about in this episode, you have Solutrean, maritime route or coastal highway, also Kelp highway, and there's also this like Oceanic one, Polynesian colonization, and we'll get to those like later in this episode. Yeah, David.
I was going to say, if you're curious to know like what we're talking about and you want to get a picture of it, the best way to describe this is honestly the movie Ice Age. The beginning of it, like as the credits roll, all those big herd animals are leaving presumably Europe, going into the Americas, or vice versa, and like they're all migrating somewhere because the weather's changing. And then the people in the humans in the story are like Pleistocene hunters, which I think are presumed to be indigenous Americans or Siberians. It's just, you know, the way they look and the tools that they use. But I always thought that was like awesome, and like it kind of goes off that theory. But those animals that are walking in are definitely North American animals walking through the corridor, and I thought that was a really cool touch in the movie.
Yeah, and as animals are walking in, there's animals walking out. Like horses are
peace.
Yeah, they're from North America, but they go the opposite way into Europe. So there's
camels.
There's an exchange. There's a highway. Mm-hmm. Camels, antelope, right? Because like pronghorn in the U.S. are related to gazelles in Africa.
Pronghorn's closest living relative is the giraffe, actually.
Well, I was wrong. And on that note, we will be back.
Antelope capridae is like their, anyway. But yeah, that's why they got those little things on their head. Like giraffes have those little like antenna looking things. Okay. It's just a giant long neck pronghorn.
I'll never unsee that.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll be right back with our conversation about Clovis and pre-Clovis here in segment 2 of episode 53.
Welcome back to episode 53 of Life in Ruins podcast. We are here chatting about pre-Clovis, Clovis Organized Syndicates, as you will see. So we kind of introduced allegedly, they're nothing proven. We talked about these two other theories, at least mentioned them in the previous segment, the Solutrean hypothesis, the maritime hypothesis, and then also the Polynesian kind of hypothesis. So after Clovis is discovered, and there's not a lot of pre-Clovis stuff that really is proven after those discoveries. And then you kind of get these series of sites that are discovered that have dates that might push the boundaries of Clovis stuff. And on the Solutrean side, kind of this East Coast idea, you have, Meadowcroft, Topper, Galt, Cactus Hill. And the theory behind all these like kind of Paleoindian, the Solutrean hypothesis is that these points, projectile points in France really match or are similarly napped to what is discovered at Meadowcroft, Topper, and things like that.
Yeah, but those points. So that's.
I wouldn't say match for sure. Let's that out of here.
Yeah, let's put an asterisk on that one.
Yeah,
like the Clovis sites are known as Clovis sites because you find Clovis points, and a lot of times butchered animals, flakes, and you find people start finding what they call pre-Clovis, but there's no diagnostic points. There's no really butchered animals. They just look like shatter, which we talk about in the Cerruti episode, and then you start getting sites like Meadowcroft, Cactus Hill, and Topper. And I think those are like 60s, 70s. Those are being excavated. And this ties into what Connor talked about, Solutrean, which is really promoted by Dennis Stanford, who got his master's at the University of Wyoming. Bruce Bradley, I don't know where he got his degrees from.
Somewhere else that was like legit, like a prestigious place.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, they're nice people. Well, and, rest in peace, Dennis Stanford. They work for the Smithsonian. And they have this idea that Solutrean points and Clovis are really similar. But if you actually look at a Clovis point, which is fluted and has those little like earlobes at the bottom.
Ears,
yeah. They got ears on them and they're fluted. But you look at a Solutrean point, not only are they from a completely different part of Europe, not really northern France, there's like a separation in time. Like Solutrean points, like 20,000 years, 30,000 years. You don't get Clovis until 12,000 years ago in the Americas. They're not fluted. They don't have those ears. They don't look really similar. And the Solutrean points appear to be really decorative. So there really isn't a match.
Solutrean, if you the audience listening, if you want a good example of that, the movie Alpha, that's Solutrean culture. They make Solutrean points there. And
there's also this thing where the Solutrean technology that they find in Europe disappears around 17,000 years ago. It really just kind of goes away. So it's a little circumstantial in how they're approaching it.
It's kind of like what Cumberland is to Clovis, it's like a regionally distinct area because what do you call it? Solutrean's just a form of Gravettian. It's like the bigger Gravettian cultural complex of Europe at that time. And then Solutrean are the people that distinctly lived in France and made those points that way. But yes, it just kind of fades out of, popularity or whatever.
The theory being that they got up and left and they kind of skirted along the ice sheets and hunted some mammoth.
In the Atlantic, right?
Oh, yeah, not mammoths. Allegedly. So they hunted, sea mammals and kind of skirted along this, allegedly.
They floated on the ice sheet across from France to Delaware by hunting seals and laying on the ice sheet at night, making a camp out of their boats turned upside down with oil fires on the inside. Love the idea. The execution is much to be desired, guys. Let me see you do it, and then we'll talk about droves of people leaving France, coming to Delaware to use some Old Bay on their mammoths.
Old Bay all day, baby. I love Old Bay.
Come at me, guys. It's an absurd idea, Bruce. And I love the idea of comparing the technologies, right? You got those barbed points you find in Japan that also correlate with the ones that are in the Channel Islands in California, which might support the Kelp Highway hypothesis. But that one makes a little more sense.
Yeah, there's
just
some
throwing
coast.
that out there.
Exactly. There's some coast.
There's land.
This one is they're purely surviving on ice, and it's all right, okay. But you get sites like Meadowcroft, and I'm familiar with Meadowcroft. It was excavated by Ottavazio, Dr. Ottavazio. At the time, he was working at the University of Pittsburgh. And the guy that got me into archaeology, Dr. David Clark, who's a professor and anthropologist at Catholic, he was his grad student. Apparently, the story is Ottavazio just busted in the lab and was got a site, let's go dig it. And that's how David Clark got involved. And he brought us out to Meadowcroft. And there's a couple things about Meadowcroft, fellas. It's never been published. So this was done in the 70s. Ottavazio, he's just never published on it. He's sitting on that material. It's in coal country. It's in Pennsylvania. So they're dating charcoal. That's interesting. But the thing with Meadowcroft is if you look at it, the way that the rock has collapsed, it does kind of, it'd be really hard to get charcoal, it looks like Tetris almost to get that level, but he's never published on it. Every time they redate the material, it gets younger and younger. So we really can't talk much about Meadowcroft. And once again, there's nothing diagnosticable. They're diagnostic. So there aren't points. There's just some interesting looking shatter, which could be naturally formed, right? But Meadowcroft, I think now stands, they claim 19,000 years ago. So 1700 or 17,000 BCE. They have a really gorgeous interpretive center, though. Like, you go to their website.
The site is really cool.
Yeah, they have a historic village. They have Atlatl days. Like, it's like they have a woodland village up there. It's like really cool to visit, to be honest. And they also have some like frontier day stuff, like 1770s. Like, it's a really cool, like,
the rock shelter itself is cool. Like, it's a cool looking place. Yeah. Never been. I've just seen a virtual tour online, and they do have a really good virtual tour. If you just Google Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, it's a cool looking thing.
Mm-hmm. But it gets brought into that whole Solutrean argument.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the first ones to be discovered and kind of grouped in there, from what I kind of generally remember. But then there's other sites, like David's pretty familiar with Topper.
I am.
You've been there.
I've been there. Dug a few holes there.
Drank some swamp mater.
Some swamp mater. Yeah.
Swamp mater.
Had some great times there. My formative years of archaeology. Hanging out, made me fall in love with archaeology. Is there 50,000-year-old flakes down there in the Pleistocene Terrace? Who's to say? Is there an overwhelming amount of Clovis artifacts on the Clovis level at 13,000 to 11,000 years old, scattering the entire site in its entirety? I can say, yes, there are. Have I personally stuck an auger down the middle of the bottom of the Clovis fuller, down another meter, and pulled something out and not found anything in it? I can say there's nothing in it. But in this one spot where there's this giant pit excavation, it's a beautiful looking excavation with a big, like, built, like ceiling on it and everything, kind of like Hellgap has. They think that there are 50,000-year-old bend breaks down in there. And a dissertation came out and proved that it's probably just, ice can shatter things just as easily in half like that.
50,000 years ago?
50,000 years ago. And to put that into perspective, people only got to Australia 40,000 years ago. So they would have had to have booked it from all the way to, like, bypass that, gone all the way up through Siberia or wherever, down the coast or whatever, all the way to the Georgia, South Carolina border. I don't think that's the thing.
If you're on a mission, man, come on. I could walk
if you're
that.
on a mission, but you would have had to have, like, been walking through, like, Iran and been like, what? Really, really want to book it to Allendale, South Carolina. Let's just go. And, like, made it the whole way, made boats, a strategic plan, rolled down the map, blitzkrieged it to South Carolina. Really, guys? I don't think so. Allegedly.
It's about the Old Bay. They created Old Bay.
They want that Creole.
They want those blue crabs, man. They were there for a blue crab bake.
I love Al. He's a great man, Al Goodyear. But he's the one who runs Topper. He's retired now. Topper's kind of retired itself. But I don't think that it is a 50,000-year-old site. I think 13 to 11, and I think 11 is the date we usually get. It's 11 or 10, I can't recall, but I've personally picked out a Clovis point there myself. It was broken in half, and it was fluted, and I can tell that person who did that was like, and threw it. But yeah, the rest of it there,
It was Dean.
I don't think so. Well, it was Dean. And guys, if you're listening, go back to that one episode where we talk about Dean. It's just Ralph Wiggum and the archaeological record. But also, I don't mean to say that, like, I'm claiming authority, that, like, I know what's best for this site. Like, I've literally, like I'm saying, put an auger through, I think 2 units I did. Or no, I did one myself, saw another one go through all the way down to the bottom, past the Clovis level, and every 10 inches down, or however a bucket of an auger is like, what, 10, 12 inches? I think it's 10 inches. 10 centimeters. There you go. Nothing in it. I remember being like, void. And then we just, like, wrote on the map. Nothing down there. The rest of it could maybe from the river, because it is on the river. That, rivers are known to flood and move stuff around. But anyway, that's my soapbox on that. Let's move on to Cactus Hill. I know nothing about it.
I don't know much about it either. I think Crabo worked there.
He worked at Paisley Caves.
I know that, but I think he did do something at Cactus Hill, though. Or knows about it.
Maybe. All right, let's skip Cactus Hill. Let's go to Paige Ladson.
Well, but like kind of connected with that is that, like, you guys know about the Chesapeake Mastodon.
That's the one that was the Solutrean thing, right?
Yeah, that's the one where they dredged a mastodon out of the Chesapeake looking for blue crabs, I imagine, to put Old Bay on.
Oh.
And pulled out like a mastodon skull, and there was like an undiagnostic knife found with it. And then they dated the mastodon as like 22,000 years. And there's like this geologist hit up Stanford and like, look, yes, it matches with Meadowcroft, Cactus Hill, and Topper. This proves it. And it's like, nah, fam. I don't know much about like underwater archaeology, but like, or that whole process, but it's at the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay. And I don't know how close that knife was found in situ.
When you're sucking it in a dredge machine, you're literally pulling out of a vacuum and then shooting it into like a bin, like pumping stuff from the ground through a tube into a bin to collect it and sift the water out. There's no context.
Yeah, I wonder what the carbon nitrogen ratios are, right? Like the isotope ratios, because if it's been underwater for so long, there has to be some funny business going on with the isotopes. So I'd be like really curious to see if they redated it today, if it would pass under modern like chronometric standards.
Yeah,
that's above my pay grade. I don't know.
Yeah,
if anyone does that, let us know. And for all those who also very much enjoy Old Bay, please send us a review.
Welcome to Light Rooms Podcast, brought to you by Old Bay.
I think, and kind of going on with this underwater archaeology thing, Page Ladson is an underwater archaeology site which has dates to 1405. It's in Florida, right off of Florida. It's in a sinkhole in some river, the Big Bend region, wherever that is. And I think I would love to have Jessie Halligan on the show to talk about this. I know her and Shane are really good friends, and because this is being studied right now, and this might be something that kind of bears fruit eventually. I mean, it seems like their dates are solid, and how it fits into everything. I don't think we can write off Page Ladson right now because it's still actively being studied, and we'll see what happens. But I think the bigger problem with this Solutrean hypothesis is really what people are using it to say. What ultimately coming out of the Solutrean hypothesis is this idea that Europeans were the first people to colonize America. And there are some racial connotations and issues with current Native Americans and things like that people have really taken to another, almost into like a white supremacy kind of thing, that Europeans are the only people, we're here in America first. So all native
first people here.
Yeah. And
allegedly. And here's the thing though, people 20,000 years ago in Europe, they weren't white. Weren't white at all. So theory ousted. Next.
I wish it was that simple though.
Yeah.
I wish it was that simple though. It's taken. So it's like this great idea, like, okay, maybe there's this connection between Europe and America and maybe people came here early, but it's just taken this whole racial connotation thing that, I don't know, Carlton, I assume that
that wasn't his intent, right? Yeah. Like, that's not what like Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley aren't saying here, like, white power, like we got here from France. Like that's not, they're just trying to look at human migrations. They're not talking about race or skin color. And like, as David said, there's people living in, is this Mesolithic Europe?
Paleolithic still.
Paleolithic 20,000 years ago. They're not white. We haven't had the, Indo thing happen yet, that expansion.
So go ahead. Let them chant Europeans got to America first. But show them what the picture, get a Tori Mazza to draw it up. Show them what people look like then. They'll be like, what? Oh, natives got here first.
We should have a Tori drop a piece of them entering the Chesapeake, these like brown Europeans with Solutrean points and Old Bay seasoning in their other hand, like at the shore.
That's the episode placard.
Praying to a blue crab. But like, the dangerous thing about it is if you go, I don't suggest you go to this site. Take it from me. The official White Pride Worldwide website says
link in the bio.
No links.
Link in the show notes. Go there.
You'll be on a watch list. It says move over First Nations. You have it wrong. The very latest DNA research has now proven conclusively that DNA lineage probably found in Europe got to the Great Lakes at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier, several thousand years before Indians made it across the Bering Strait. Whites were the first Americans after all, and they talk about Solutrean. However, none of that DNA research that they talk about is valid, and the Solutrean, of course, is highly problematic. And even if it was, they're not white.
Control F for Jews on that site. Let me see what they got to say about me.
And on that note, we're going to end the segment.
We're not going to do that.
We'll catch you in segment 3 where we're talking episode 53, pre-Clovis, Clovis, and we'll catch you in the next segment.
Welcome back to episode 53 of A Life from Humans podcast. This is segment 3. We are talking about Clovis, pre-Clovis, everything surrounding that. You've been hearing some top tier journalism, if you don't mind me saying myself. Yeah, so let's get on to the rest.
Absolutely. So Solutrean outright, you guys can take this to the bank and cash this in. We'll 100% support you. Solutrean is not legit. There's no DNA evidence that supports it. The material evidence doesn't support it. The sites themselves are Mickey Mouse Clubhouse kind of stuff. They're fun to read, but that's about it. And you can email me if you disagree, and I don't care. But, yep. However, continuing on this, like, Clovis is established. We know Clovis is established. We have the material remains. And there were still people looking for, like, pre-Clovis. You have, like, the Galt site in Deborah Friedkin out in Texas. Once again, no diagnostic materials. It's just a bunch of wonky-looking flakes. Is it legit? Probably not. Now, is a organization that excavated them, the like First Americans organization, I think they are. Like their whole goal is to find the earliest stuff.
Center for the Study of the First Americans.
Yeah.
Texas.
Are they biased? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know those people. If you do, reach out. We'd love to have you on the show.
I know some A&M people. They're good people.
Really? Yeah, I bet. A lot. I like all archaeologists. Some I just don't agree with professionally. Others I don't agree with ethically or morally, but that's a different day.
Did I tell you guys, when I went out to A&M to visit for my PhD, they were like, you're from Wyoming? And I was like, yeah. They were like, I thought there was like this beef between Wyoming and A&M. And I was like, I didn't know there was beef. And they're like, oh, there's definitely beef. You're the first Wyoming person to be here. And I was like, looked around and I was like, I don't give a shit. And they were like, oh, okay.
There was this is relevant. The first winter I was back from Wyoming, back in Northern Virginia, I was on Tinder, as one does when you're outside of Laramie and you actually have a Tinder pool above 5. And I matched with one of Ian Hodder's graduate students. Oh, yeah. And we were matching back and forth. Like, yeah, we're both archaeologists. She's like, yeah, my advisor's Ian Hodder. And I was like, oh, well, my advisor's Bob Kelly. She's like Robert Kelly from like the University of Wyoming. I was like, yeah. She's like, oh.
She reported you?
Yeah, I'm busy. And then like just cut the match. And I texted Crave. I was like, you want to get this, man? Yeah. And so I don't know about that, but
I got it. So
Monteverde, Chile.
Yeah, Monteverde, which is I think one of the more interesting like pre-Clovis sites. It's piss off. Okay, so it's it's a solid like stratigraphic site that has dates. I'm not sure what the initial the highest level dates are, but it goes from back to apparently 33,000 years before present. I think it's in Chile. It's in the bottom of South America. So it's kind of this interesting site in that it appears to be very old and is also very far from where we know humans originally came from. And this isn't allegedly, from Asia down into the Americas. So I don't know. I think, and we can talk about this more.
But the 33,000 year stuff isn't diagnostic. But like the diagnostic stuff, the wooden tent pegs, the mastodon hide, the stone tools, which are diagnostic, the El Yobo projectile points, those all come from around 14,800 year old occupation. Like that's the one that people stick with, not the 33,000 year one, and that's well dated.
Are they actually tent stakes though? Think about it though, because you have post whatever they are. You have all of these old pre-Clovis and Clovis sites where there's no organics ever found. And it's just like chipstone points and like some shatter. And then this place is like, we got seaweed and we have tent stakes.
And Old Bay.
And like, I don't know about that, man. I think the site, it's cool, right? And they got that little medicine bundle, but like, is it a medicine bundle? Who's to say? Carlton might be able to say.
I didn't know there was a medicine bottle, but no. The mastodon hide, though, the processed mastodon hide, I'll take tent pegs because even Clovis sites have, radiocarbon dated post holes. I think it's legit. And that whole thing goes with that kelp highway, coastal migration, and the reason why we don't find sites even in between, like the sea levels rose 120 meters at the end of the Pleistocene. So all the early sites, even on the east-west coast, they're underwater now. But this Monteverde site is up. I don't think it's a cave, but it's in higher elevation.
It's inland. It's not on the coast, but it's like closer to the coast than Topper is.
It's on a
this
bay.
Was like the first possibly confirmed pre-Clovis. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
this one had diagnostics.
Yeah. There's stone tools in that and in that seaweed stuff like that, and cordage as well. So it's not just seaweed and post holes or whatever. So there's a little bit more.
Tin containers with red tops.
Get out of here,
dude! The Old Bay tin can is like I'm just saying.
I can't believe this is like this is the Old Bay episode of the
Mid-Atlantic. You know about Old Bay.
I know Old Bay, dude. I think it's a cool idea, and I think yes, the kelp highway hypothesis, which we should talk about here, it does lead me to believe that is a possibility. But I just know there's a lot of criticism to it that's like valid. And there's also criticism that's like against that criticism that like is also valid. So I don't personally know. It's just such a one-off site all the way down there that's like has these organics, but like, do they?
But the El Yobo Point at Monteverde looks awfully similar to the bone projectile point found in the Mastodon Kill in, Washington State. And that's 13,800 years ago, also along the West Coast. And it's all that same projectile point typology is being found all across early sites that are all dating to around 14,000 and above 13.5.
How do you spell El Yobo?
Along the West Coast. Jobo.
Oh, okay.
And they're all found on the West Coast, and they're all diagnostic. Now that people are looking there, like that pool of people that are pre-Clovis is getting much larger. Like I think the last debates that were in Albuquerque, I'm pretty sure Bob Kelly was present. I didn't see it, but I know the pool of Clovis first is getting smaller, much smaller.
Yeah. But then
not at Wyoming though.
No. Well, and the El Yobo points are kind of like generally like grouped into this like Western stemmed, right? Which is supposed to be like this early non-Clovis projectile point technology that occurs along the coast at Harper's Ferry. I think I could be wrong, but some of the Channel Islands stuff I think has similar sort of projectile points.
Yep.
And I think the dating is obviously the problem, but there is a stone tool technology that's a little bit different that occurs in kind of this Oregon, Washington, California area, Nevada maybe
Alaska.
too, Alaska as well. That looks a little different. David's rolling his eyes, but
I think based
on
the,
I lean towards Monteverde being real, but I am not fully convinced. If that makes sense, like I'm open to it.
Okay.
I just like I'd have to hold the tent stakes in my hand and be like, okay, these are tent stakes. Like I don't know. It just seems.
You think that'd be in it?
But like it is a cool site.
Would that be an intense experience?
Carlton really liked that one.
I love that joke.
Moving on.
Camping's intense. Yeah.
We got to talk about the Kelp Highway. So the Kelp Highway hypothesis by John Erlandson, 2007, I believe is the year. I could be wrong there. 2005, 2007. And this is the idea that instead of coming through the corridor, maybe they did come through the corridor as well later, that people were coming down through boats along the coast. And if you do the paleoecology, there is an extended kelp forest that literally reaches from northern Japan all the way up through the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, going up through there to the Aleutian Islands, which is that big, island chain south of Alaska, and then all the way down the Pacific towards mid-Mexico. You have a kelp forest. So this would have been the similar environment for people to eat the same foods. The same animals are going to live there, just, varying in climates. So mostly seals, fish, kelp, got all your nutrients. And there's also similar points that it's not confirmed, but they look very similar in Japan and they look very similar in Channel Islands in California. Now, do they look similar because they were the same people? Probably not, but they have a similar function, probably something to do with hunting seals. And you want something that's barbed to keep a hold of the seal when you're pulling it, you know? So I think that's a valid, we can't say it's not valid, you know, because like people clearly were probably coming in boats, but
yeah,
the boats
that's how people got to Australia, right? Like,
yeah,
we're not talking about like Polynesian, the huge rafts, boat, like the vessels they had. Like you can easily have a small boat and you can follow the coast. Like unlike Solutrean where you're following ice, the coast still exists. Like those ice sheets are not covering the west coast completely. They allow for a little pocket of land that you can travel. But the big thing is, if you look at the distribution of the glaciers in North America and the mountain ranges, there's like a separation between where the people on the coast could go. And like, if you're, as David said, on the Kelp Highway, it's highly diverse in food materials. Like you can have a very caloric dense diet, like even up to historic times, Tlingit Inuit people on the West Coast, like they could fish all day and be fine. They didn't have to farm. Like why would you leave that? And it also explains how you get from, like Manus to Monteverde really quickly, because you could just follow the coast and just camp every night on the shore, So it makes sense from like logistically, right? Like in terms of this is possible.
Yeah. I think
I like it. I think that's my favorite. Yeah, you go, Connor. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, I think that's, and I think as we go further in archaeology, as we research more on the coast, I think we're going to find more sites that are going to be underwater, maybe, that are going to date to this period and possibly, confirm this stuff. Because it's just, yeah, like you said, it's the most legit. And we had, I think David was there at the University of Wyoming. We had John Erlinson come talk and kind of give his outline for it. And I would, and even Todd Suravel, who's pretty much, the Clovis Organized Crime Syndicate. I don't think he's the top boss, but he's,
allegedly.
He's
a Don.
Yeah. No, he's
allegedly a Don.
No, I think, yeah, he invited
just looking milk boy or paper boy, whatever they call him.
I'm in waste management.
Yeah, no, I think, but I think even Todd, I think it's a super compelling argument. I don't think Todd was convinced ultimately, but it's a really solid argument and very possible.
Yeah, and I don't think there has to be like one migration, right? We're probably talking about multiples. I don't think there's pre-Clovis east of the Rockies. Like fundamentally, I think Clovis people came through the ice-free corridor, and I think there is a component that's along the coast that just happens to arrive there quicker. And they're probably coming from two different people. You're talking about, if you look at the map of Siberia, people going through the ice-free corridor are coming from northern Siberia, and the people coming from the maritime route, they're along the coast of China, like as David said, Japan and the East China Sea. So they're probably two groups of people coming in different ways. You have the fishermen, and then you have primarily terrestrial hunters.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it is. And like my big piece that I always tell people when they ask me on ethno and stuff is like, do you think Clovis first? And I'm like, well, I am Clovis first in the sense that I am in an organized crime syndicate. I'm just kidding. But I'm Clovis first in the sense that Clovis is the first widespread ubiquitous culture across the continent. No doubt. 100%. They use the same tools. They make their tools the same way. They live the same way, migrate the same way, and hunt food the same way. However, that does not mean that there weren't a few people coming in boats, a couple hundred to maybe 1,000, maybe thousands of years before. But that doesn't mean, and I want to say this again, that wasn't in droves. That was like a few small people, like what they were saying were coming across the ice corridor or the ice sheets from France. No, I think it's way more likely that small people were coming, not little people, but like, people. Like little statured people, like little amounts of people were coming through.
They weren't the little people.
Yeah, we're coming down the coast.
And even the Clovis people, right? We're not talking about thousands. Like even population estimates for Clovis are in the hundreds and lower thousands.
Right.
You know, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people coming here. The people that colonized North and South America, you're talking about like a few thousand. So even if it was like a couple dozen on the West Coast, or maybe a couple hundred, you know, there's reasons why when there is huge court cases on human remains like Kennewick Man or the Ancient One, they show relationships to the Ainu and the West Coast. And if you look at West Coast peoples, they have higher genetic affinity to East Asian populations, and some of the other ones have more Siberian.
Would you look at that?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Would you look at that?
That's crazy.
You know, people aren't throughout time and space across the globe. You know, people are people. They begat with other people, and you have mixed ancestry regardless. But there's no European, or there's definitely no Indo-European coming in. All the genetics points to Siberian or East Asian. So Solutreans out. And I think like we didn't even touch about it, but a tiny little smidgen, maybe a couple people got lost on their way out of Australia, ended up in South America. Did not like a colonization effect, but maybe got lost. There's a little bit. I'd highly recommend you guys looking that out because it's really minute.
It's a new paper that came out too. Yeah. But I mean, that's always been pushed around. And if they got to Easter Island, they also could have gotten a little further to, you know, the coast. And I think there is some evidence of like chicken bones being somewhere, but I think that's been disproven in South America. I can't remember. It's going to be a small amount, fam, for me.
Yeah. It's like,
going to be a small amount, dog.
They're not like, there's not armadas coming across the Kelp Highway or from Polynesia. It's just like, I just don't think humans were organized in that way, or we're doing that stuff.
Go with the genetic flow. And the genetic flow points to East Asian, Northern Siberian peoples. And would you look at that? Don't indigenous Americans and Siberian peoples look pretty similar? Whoa.
Especially Inuit people. Like, I mean, they're the closest to those Asian populations. Like, you look.
Like you said, they're trading with each other.
They're trading, like.
Trading lots of things.
And they're, yeah. But.
I think.
And if you look at their oral traditions, right? Like, something that I find fascinating, like, Pawnees, we don't, and Rickeras and Wichita's, we don't have like a coastal migration route. We have essentially an ice-free corridor situation, talking about mountains of ice and this land of dark. Whereas other tribes do talk about a coastal. They followed the coast. So ask the tribes. They have oral traditions about these things. And that, you know,
I think I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. That, you know, that's where we're at, you know, coasts. It's definitely West Coast. East Coast is out categorically.
Yeah, no East Coast.
There is no organized crime syndicate to be heard of. You don't know anything about it.
It's the first
But if you're curious, please contact Robert L. Kelly at the University of Wyoming.
Allegedly. I plead the fifth. We are in debitage waste management.
The first rule of the Clovis Mafia is that you don't talk about the Clovis Mafia.
Just don't talk about it. You just don't talk about it. So, yeah, you know, we're really excited. We've got some pretty good feedback about these Just the Boys topics. We plan on talking more topics like this, covering different archaeological components where it's just us and our goofiness.
Guys, a lot of you have been reaching out to me on Ethno, actually, telling me that you enjoy the podcast and stuff. Awesome. I love that. If you do listen to it and you haven't reached out to me, do let me know. But also, if you guys could follow and like the podcast Instagram and also hit us up on there, that really helps us out. Then we know how many people are, you know, listening to us and like what they like, and it just really helps. So don't be shy. Like, hit me up.
Yeah, hit us up on the Instagram, email us. Yeah, and if you have ideas for future segments or guests, please email us. Like, we have a running list of people that we should interview. Like,
and rate the podcast and provide us with feedback on whichever podcasting platform you're using to listen to our show. So, on that note, we are out.
Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer. So, gents, why did the Invisible Man turn down a job offer?
I don't know, Connor.
He couldn't see himself doing it.
God damn it.
I'm out.
Yep. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV Traveling America, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.